Good morning, guys. I hope your day is starting off just fantastic. It's a little bit of a cold, blustery day here. And the news this morning is, of course, more escalation in the tariff war. This time, it's the US versus the world. And the news comes in the form of an executive order signed by the US president, which targets the whole world with 25% tariffs on autos. So you might have heard that 25% number as the headline number, but here are some of the details. So a new 25% duty will strike all finished vehicles imported into the United States. All right, this will start April 3rd. Then following that, some parts will be targeted with tariffs, and in weeks, perhaps all parts will be targeted. So it looks like, to start off, the tariffs are on finished automobiles being imported to the United States. And another comment that the president has made is that perhaps on April 3rd, it may start as 2.5% tariff on finished automobiles and slowly increase to 25%. So it's fairly vague now on exactly how it's going to work. And I guess we'll find out April 3rd. But the key items are that the target is 25% tariffs on import of automobiles into the United States, on everyone, and not necessarily on parts. And this is kind of a key point with respect to North America, because of course North American car manufacturing is very integrated. Just as an example, between Canada and the United States, most of Canada's manufacturing of automobiles and automobile parts is in the southern Ontario area, which is very close to the United States. And it is common in some car models for parts to cross the border multiple times as cars are assembled. So cars that are finally assembled in Canada parts may have crossed the border into the United States, and there may have been trade 4, 5, 6 times before the final manufactured product either comes out of a plant in Ontario or comes out of a plant in the United States. So trying to track each part as it crosses the border and implement tariffs on every single part is fairly complicated and would result in a compound tariffs, which could end up, if a parts cross 6 times, you can see how 25% times 6, it could end up being a complete, for lack of better description, a complete shit show. So it looks like they've carved that out and put that aside and said, well, we'll worry about that later, but we're going to apply the 25% tariff on the final product. And of course, the strategy is to have the final product manufactured in the United States. That's the U.S. administration's goal. And we'll see if it starts off at 2.5% and moves up. And exactly, it's, as all policies coming out of Washington these days, it's a wait and see, kind of a chaos approach that no one really knows what's going to happen until it finally starts happening. This is also going to affect the world in a big way because, for example, Japan, about a third of Japan's exports to the world are automobiles, and a large majority of those automobiles are exported to the United States. This is going to affect Europe, Germany, and European car manufacturers who their biggest customer is the United States. Basically, it's going to affect the trade in automobiles around the world. This was announced yesterday. This article deals specifically with how this is going to affect Canada. And this article goes on to say that this stance marks an end of decades-long period of Canada-US free trade in automobiles. And that is true right up till this trade war. The trade in automobiles between the United States and Canada was completely tariff-free, parts and automobiles. It goes on to say that these tariffs are even higher than tariffs that existed before the 1965 Auto Pact. Autos are by far the most lucrative manufacturing product that Canada sells to the world. This makes these tariffs potentially more significant than any other trade threats from Donald Trump, including the 10% levy on energy and the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. So things are escalating, and there's been some response from Canada's political leaders because, of course, we're in an election right now. Let me just give you a flavor for what the response is. The leader of the Liberal Party, Mark Carney, said he would return to Ottawa as Prime Minister and convene a meeting on Thursday of the Canada-US Cabinet Committee, and suggested that retaliation measures might follow. And he fumed at Trump's actions as an abdication of the continental trade agreement that exists now between the two countries. This is a violation and he has betrayed our trade agreement, Carney said. A response will happen soon. I won't say more. When it comes to our options, we definitely do have options. That's his statement. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said that Trump must, quote, knock it off, was his comment. He goes on to say, we had the best trade relationship in the world, in the history of the world, before these unnecessary interruptions struck our economy, and they're hurting both sides of the border. He said, it's time for Trump to knock it off. That's his response. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh's response was to say, this is a full frontal attack on auto workers. These are hundreds and thousands of workers right now that are wondering if their line is going to get shut down and if they're going to lose their job. We got to fight back like hell, is what he said. So that's the reaction from the key federal party leaders in Canada. Of course, they're campaigning now because we're going to have an election on April 28th. Now you can see that if all countries in the world are targeted here, that perhaps new supply chains and new trade relationships might start to form between all the countries in the world that are being targeted by the United States. That's a possibility. I'm not going to get into a lot of details on how this is going to work its way through the economies of the whole world, because it's going to be very complicated, and it would probably take hours to try and just even contemplate all the different perambulations of what could happen. Trust me, if you just have an anecdotal response in your brain, this is great, this is going to result in fantastic news for the United States, you haven't thought it through very well. And on the other hand, if you say, well, this is a disaster, we have to fight back immediately, we have to do this and this, because you haven't thought it through carefully. This is going to be something that is going to play out slowly throughout the world on shifting supply chains, shifting trade alliances. There's potential huge ramifications here, guys, on just how the trade of automobiles progresses in the world now. Remember, there's big players. China, who produces a lot of cheap automobiles. China is heavily tariffed by most Western countries. Will that realign itself? Will that change? Will the European Union, Canada, Australia, will they lift tariffs that are on Chinese vehicles now? Will they encourage China to come and build vehicles in their countries? Will there be more trade between Canada and the EU? Will there be more trade between Japan and the EU? There's so many different factors to think about here that it's very hard to try and figure out exactly what's going to happen. And funny enough, guys, this action was launched by Donald Trump through executive order, which he signed yesterday in the middle of the day. And maybe he was kind of thinking about these things, or one of his advisors mentioned this, that there might be some developments that they might have to think about, or unintended consequences of this action. And it's funny because at 2 o'clock in the morning, maybe he couldn't sleep, and he released this statement on Truth Social. And I'll read it to you, okay? Just a simple quote here from Donald Trump at 2 o'clock in the morning on Truth Social. If the European Union works with Canada in order to do economic harm to the USA, large-scale tariffs, far larger than currently planned, will be placed on them both in order to protect the best friend that each of those two countries has ever had. So I guess perhaps he was thinking that if the United States launches a trade war and puts tariffs on everyone in the world, that maybe some of those former friendly countries might form some alliances amongst themselves and start trading with themselves. And how dare they, if they do that, there will just be more tariffs. I'm paraphrasing now. And the final line is just comical to me. He would place more tariffs on the EU and Canada if they work together to protect the best friend that each of those countries ever had, which I guess our best friend is the United States. And they're such good friends that they're imposing tariffs on everyone. And if countries react, then their best friend might be more mad at them. It just seems comical to me. It's like that, as if it was kids playing in a sandbox, right? And Jimmy's saying, well, I don't want to play with Billy anymore. Billy, I'm not playing with you and Sammy anymore. Get out of my sandbox. But if Billy and Sammy go play in a different sandbox, hey, you guys, I'm your best friend, and if you play in a different sandbox now, I'm going to take your toys. And it's just, it's almost ridiculous, guys. A little bit of humor there, but so there you go, guys. Another day and another escalation in the worldwide trade war. Let me know what you guys think. And this is going to come April 3rd. And remember, April 2nd is a Liberation Day for the United States. This is where, on top of all this, there's a plan for reciprocal tariffs against the whole world, I guess, targeting countries that currently have tariffs on the U.S. And the U.S. is planning reciprocal tariffs. That will probably affect the European Union the most, and some other countries that do have tariffs on the United States. And I know the EU, for instance, in automobiles, has tariffs on U.S. imports. There were no tariffs in Canada on U.S. automobiles. Of course, Canada, the United States, and Mexico had completely free trade of automobile and automobile parts based on the USMCA until recently. So we'll see how April 2nd and April 3rd, I guess, will be, I guess we should call it Liberation Week, is going to happen in the United States, the beginning of April. We're going to skip April Fool's Day and then get right into Liberation Week in the United States, and we'll see how that goes. Leave some comments. Let me know what you guys think. It's hard to know what's going to happen, guys. I'm just reading you the information. It's really hard to know what's going to happen. I'm going to do another video, and I might release it today or tomorrow morning, of Captain Canada. I didn't talk about him. Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario. Of course, he was the one that weighed it. Should we do that? Should we review Captain Canada's? You can stop watching the video now, or I'm going to show you the press conference that Captain Canada just had. Remember, we're in a federal election now. The federal leaders that are campaigning gave their statements on what's happening, but Captain Canada launched right in. We'll watch his interview now if you want, but if you don't, I will catch you guys on the next one.
So it looks like we're back at it again. I just want to see exactly what he's preparing for April 2nd. As he says, he's doing the global tariffs around the world. In the same sentence, he says he's going to be very nice to his allies. Well, let's see how nice he's going to be. So we'll be prepared, and we'll convene the FMM, and I'll be speaking to the Prime Minister as we move forward over the next few days, as well as I spoke to him today.
Are you ready to do the electricity tariffs at this point?
Well, what I
export tax?
Yeah, what I want to see, I want to see where he's coming from on April the 2nd. I want to take a Team Canada approach. I do not want to hurt other provinces on that, but I can assure you one thing. We're going to make sure that we inflict as much pain as possible to the American people without inflicting pain on the Canadian population.
You guys notice that? Are you going to impose those electricity tariffs again, Doug? Remember, in the past, he immediately launched an export tax on electricity going to the United States and threatened to shut it off. And he received a phone call and immediately backed down because it was pointed out to him that if you do this, perhaps the U.S. will just stop oil and gas and fuel coming into Ontario and Quebec. And so now he's not as big a Captain Canada as he was before. He's a smaller Captain Canada now, a little bit more reserved and a little bit more. Maybe I should think about things before I just blurt out my response.
And that's the reason we've done 2 rounds of 30 billion and 30 billion, and the last 65 billion. It will hurt. I'll be very, very frank, but I've talked to a tremendous amount of people going to events, and I'm very transparent by saying we have 2 options here. We either roll over as a country, and he runs us over 15 times and gets what he wants, or we feel a little bit of pain, and we fight like we've never fought before. I prefer the latter. I believe in fighting, and
Okay, he believes in fighting, which, I mean, this is good politics, right? I believe in fighting. Fight, fight, fight. We're going to win, right? But let me just point out to you some reality, just so that you know the numbers here, okay? The two economies. The U.S. economy is 10 times the size of the Canadian economy. And just some numbers here. Canada exports 75% of Canada's exports go to the United States. About 50% of Canada's imports come from the United States. The United States exports about 17% of their exports to Canada, and their imports are 12% from Canada. So we represent a much smaller fraction of the U.S. economy. It's still a big chunk. You know, we're number 1, 2 in their trading partner. Canada and Mexico are 1 and 2. But really, if you took it to the extreme and you just said, let's build a wall between our two countries and then shut it all off, to try and figure out how things work, sometimes you have to look at the extreme and see what could be the possibility. Let's look at the numbers on the extreme. If you built a wall between our two countries and just shut everything off, Canada would collapse. We would lose 75% of our exports and 45% of our import capacity. Boom, we're done. For the US, it would be a 10 to 15% hit. US would survive, Canada would be in really, really bad shape. Now, on the flip side to that, there is a flip side. Canada's economy is much easier to set up new supply chains and redirect, because most of Canada's exports are raw materials, oil, gas, potash, that the United States needs for fertilizer to grow its food, uranium that the United States needs to fund its military, aluminum that the United States needs to build cars and airplanes. Raw materials, those can be redirected to other countries easily compared to the US economy, which is really a value-added economy, and I guess they're trying to build more manufacturing, more final products being sold. So Canada has the ability to pivot better than the United States. And what might happen if things continue to escalate is exactly that Canada starts setting up new supply chains with other countries. And what could end up happening is we redirect the sales of our potash and our uranium and raw materials, and other countries buy those, potentially some like China, and then they work their way around the world like that to a place like China, who ends up selling it back to the United States, or some new supply chain that routes through the world somehow and ends up back into the United States, but at a higher cost. All these trade barriers and tariffs and redistribution of supply chains, at the end of the day, they increase costs, because the reason supply chains are the way they are is because companies through the free market system have tried to source the cheapest products they can. And the United States, for example, the example of potash, US farmers need fertilizer, and the biggest supply of potash in North America is in Saskatchewan, with no other options. So it's very easy to get that potash, put it on a truck, drive it across the border and sell it. And it's a natural relationship between the two countries. But if that were to be redirected, say we sell the potash to India and China and the EU, eventually the US will have to source that potash from somewhere else in the world, and it'll just come, perhaps Canadian potash, after arriving and working its way through 3 or 4 other countries, arrives back in the United States, but it costs twice as much. So this could end up being a huge shit show. And I'm sorry, Doug, I've interrupted you. Let's keep watching here.
We'll have a big impact on the American people. He thinks, all he's doing is hurting the American people. He thinks the cost is going to go down for automobiles in the U.S. It's the total opposite. The costs are going to go skyrocketing. It keeps calling out countries. He's really pointing us out for the most part. Ontario, 50% of the parts within the vehicles are American. And, how do you dissect? They were showing me drawings today of all the different parts from all over the world, by the way, that goes in one vehicle.
Yes.
A lot are Canadian parts, a lot of Canadian companies. they have plants down in the U.S. I understand they have approximately 127 plants employing over 50,000 people directly. So let's see how they can dissect it. I find it very, very difficult to believe that they can dissect every single part in an automobile by April the 2nd, or will be implemented on April the 3rd.
This is a typical example of a politician that's uninformed and he just wants to get out there in front of the cameras. And I just read to you that the executive order excludes parts. It's on the finished product. And the U.S. has obviously thought about this for the number of months that these trade tariffs they were planning it. He's right. It's very difficult to track the movement of parts as the automobile is being made. But the U.S. executive order says that they're going to exclude parts to start off. They're just going to have the tariff. It's easy. Just exclude the parts. The tariff is going to be on the final product. So there could still be cross-border trade of parts. And the United States just wants that final product to be assembled and made, quote unquote, in the United States. So, Doug, you're just not informed.
Dollar for dollar tariffs, does that mean Canada would implement 25% tariff on U.S. automobiles coming in?
Well, first of all, thank you, Richard. Something, I really want to sit down with the rest of the premiers. I don't want to speak on behalf of all the premiers without sitting down with them and without getting into it a lot deeper with the Prime Minister. That $65 billion of tariffs that we have on the table that we can launch towards the U.S., we have to run through every tariff and minimize the pain for Canadians, maximize the pain for Americans. And I feel terrible for the Americans, but it's one person, it's President Trump, that's creating this chaos, as I call it.
That's a good answer, right? This is a completely different Captain Canada than we saw a couple of weeks ago. He's not just blurting out, well, I'll cut off the electricity. Doug, that was a good answer. He says we're going to sit down with the premiers and the Prime Minister, and you've heard it from him, and I know this, that there's about $65 billion worth of counter tariffs that we will probably implement on the United States. This is going to keep escalating, guys. Okay. Good answer, Doug.
Have you been having any conversations with the heads of these auto companies? Have they given Ontario any reassurance that they will remain in Ontario and not pick up stakes and move to the U.S.?
I have talked to a lot of the leaders of these auto companies. A lot changes, as you know, over a 4 or 5 day period. I'll request another meeting with all the Canadian CEOs, presidents of the auto sector, be it General Motors and Ford and Stellantis, Toyota and Honda, and also speak to Volkswagen on their production facility in St. Thomas.
Now that's, I'm doing politics here, right? Analysis. That's a troubling answer, because the question was, have you talked to the executives of the companies that are manufacturing in Canada, and have they assured you that they will keep production in Canada? And he did not say, yeah, I've talked to them and they assure me they're going to keep production in Canada. He was not able to say that because they're probably thinking, well, maybe we should move our plants to the United States. This is really troubling. Okay, that answer tells you there's no guarantees that production is going to stay in Canada. This is really bad news for Canada.
In your meetings with Ladnick and with the
Yes.
officials of the U.S. Trade Representative, was there not an agreement that there would be no surprises, there would be some sort of heads up? Did you get any indication that this was coming today, or is it impossible to get heads up when the
Yeah, well, you answered my question. You're bang on 100% that we thought we'd be informed. The word "no surprises" came up in the meeting, and sure,
Guys, we thought we'd be informed. We thought we had a deal with Donald.
enough. Well,
Sorry, buddy.
there's a surprise. I can't predict, or I honestly believe the American administration some days can't predict what President Trump's going to say. So he's come out early now and said these are going to be implemented on April the 2nd. I always believe the day he calls. What day does he call that on April the 2nd? Liberation. Okay, so President Trump's calling it Liberation Day. I call it Termination Day for American workers.
Canadian
I know,
workers.
President Trump's like.
It's Termination Day for Canadian workers, guys. I know he's a politician, right? He's trying to garner public support in Canada, and he won an election doing this. It's termination day for Canadian workers, not for U.S. workers.
Telling people you're fired. I didn't think he meant auto workers in the U.S. when he said that.
So on that,
Yes.
has repeatedly said that in the end, in the long term, this is going to be better for the U.S. economy. So what do you say to that?
Well, I don't know how he can think it's going to be better. He can't flick on a switch and create an auto plant overnight. We buy, over 400% more cars than Mexico. Mexico's producing probably 300 to 400% more than we're producing. It ranges from 1.3 to 1.4 million, and Mexico's well over 3.5 million. And God only knows what sort of parts are in their cars. A lot are coming over from China and slapping that made in Mexico sticker. So we buy as many.
Okay, guys, this is typical of a politician. The question was, Donald Trump said in the long term, this is going to be good for the U.S. And I just can't stand this type of politics that the answer, now he doesn't have a good answer, right? Because maybe it will be good for the U.S. in the long term for manufacturing of automobiles. So what does he do? He lashes out at another country, Mexico. Who knows where Mexico gets their parts? Maybe they come from China. I don't know. They slap a made on Mexico sticker on there. And that's just, I know that politics sells. And his comment is that there's going to be a lot of Canadians going, yeah, Mexico. They slap those Chinese parts in there. They're using China. And the U.S. should be going after Mexico, not us. And this is exactly what Donald Trump wants, right? He wants everyone else to be fighting amongst themselves while he has control. And he's fallen into the trap. It sells. I know that. We have to fight. It's Mexico. They're the ones. Trump, you should tariff Mexico, not us. But really, it's just inflammatory rhetoric he's got no proof, just pulled it out of his ass, right? Does Mexico use Chinese parts in the manufacturing of their automobiles? Does anyone know that? Does anyone fact check that? Doug, stuff like that is just nonsense. And unfortunately, it just perpetuates this constant misinformation. And you're going to have people now in Canada that believe this, right? China secretly makes cars in Mexico to compete against us. It's going to be the narrative. Really, shouldn't Canada and Mexico be trying to get along more now and maybe forming new supply chains between ourselves and working together since the U.S. is attacking both countries? Doug, that's just, you're resorting to your typical fight. I want to be the big guy. I just don't like this.
Cars off the U.S. as we sell down there. And again, I do not understand for the life of me how he thinks, when you put on a 25% tariff, how Americans aren't gonna feel the pain. Because I'll encourage the Prime Minister to target American cars as well. That's what we're gonna.
So one sentence, half of it makes sense, half of it doesn't make sense. He doesn't understand how Americans won't feel the pain. Of course, Americans will feel the pain if there's tariffs. The cost will go up in the U.S. If we tariff U.S. cars coming into Canada, Canadians will feel the pain because that's where we buy most of our cars from is the United States. So people walk away from viewing stuff like this misinformed. And it's more about whether they like the guy or not.
Focus on, and all of a sudden, over a certain period of time, a lot of these large auto manufacturers here in Canada are stockpiling parts. So once that runs out, you'll see possibly assembly lines shut down in both countries simultaneously.
What about provincially, the billions of dollars that you've promised as well for companies to draw down from? Will that be ready on April 2nd?
Well, we'll see what sectors that are hit the hardest, and we'll allocate a lot of those funds to the sectors that are hit the hardest, be it auto or anything else. And this is the tough part of negotiating with President Trump, not directly, but through Secretary Lutnick, is you don't know what's coming from day to day. You have to brace yourself, get ready, read and react. But I'm confident with all the premiers in Canada. I'm confident with the federal government right now that we'll retaliate appropriately, and we'll hit them as hard as we possibly can.
Really quickly, in terms of the Team Canada approach,
We're going to hit them as hard as we possibly can, guys.
election, now we're in the middle of a federal election,
Yeah.
and we have to somehow respond. What does that mean?
Well, just similar to when during my election, I was out there responding, and I expect the government of today, and who knows what happens by the end of the election, but they need to respond, and they will respond appropriately.
President Trump accelerated this to change the channel on his Signal Gate controversy.
Yeah, good. Excellent question. I said the same thing in the room there. You know, this could be a possible channel changer, and I can't guarantee you, but it's an awful coincidence that they have this and then they try to change it. Yeah.
Premier, this Fortress AMCAN idea
Yes.
you've been pitching, when do you pull that off of? Like,
Well,
does it
I don't
take
think
the visitors-
we should. I don't think we should ever pull it. I think we're just stronger together if we work together, and that's the message to the American people and to the elected officials, no matter if it's Republican or Democrat. Let's build an AMCAN fortress. Let's build the two strongest countries.
What he's talking about here is AMCAN. It's Captain Canada's idea that we should have a fortress, America, Canada, and exclude Mexico because Mexico is that dirty country that uses Chinese parts in their cars. And I just don't like this approach, right? It's just nonsensical and stupid, in my opinion, because we have a USMCA right now. We have a trilateral trade deal between the three countries. And Doug, all you're doing is you're going to piss off Mexico as well. I don't know why he would have this approach. It's, in my opinion, it's just not a good approach. But anyways, I think I've heard enough. So guys, I guess we'll end it there. But more escalation in the trade war around the whole world now, the U.S. versus the whole world. And I'm a little bit perturbed that some of the political response in Canada is to target Mexico. And now there's animosity between Canada and Mexico and talk of AMCAN, American-Canadian Alliance, and excluding Mexico. We have enough problems with animosity between the U.S. and Canada and starting to... do we want it to end up to be a big brawl, a bench clearing brawl around the world? I hope cooler heads prevail, and it's up in the air. I don't know, guys. I don't know what's going to happen. Leave some comments. Let me know what you think. We will keep following the issue. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying the content, and I will catch you guys on the next one.